Good evening. Welcome. I'm Sherry Dargan. I am the president of the League of Women Voters of BlackHawk-Bremer counties. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Doris Kelly is one of my favorite people. She was kind of a mentor to me as a young league president when I had questions about the legislature, about Des Moines, about league. She had a lot of the answers. And something I really appreciate about Doris is she always tells you what she thinks. She gives you the lowdown, the scoop. And tonight she's going to give us the scoop. She's going to talk about the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. Well, some of you are way too young to know much about it, I'm sure. But I was in high school when they first started talking about it. What has happened since then? Why isn't the ERA part of our Constitution? She's been working on it. So she's going to talk about the ERA, the progress, what more needs to be done. And I just want to thank her for speaking tonight from California on video. Doris is, of course, a former state lawmaker from Cedar Falls, and she was chair of Iowa's 19th Amendment Centennial Commemoration Committee. She's the former chair and former executive director of the Iowa Board of Parole and served for a long time on the board for the League of Women Voters of Iowa. Doris, give us your update.
There are lots of information provided in the video. Permit me to bring you up to date, including clarification of a couple points and additional information that may be of importance to you. In 2014, a group called the ERA Coalition was founded in an effort to get 3 more states to ratify the amendment to the Constitution. The ERA Coalition became aware of my speech that I delivered last spring to AAUW statewide convention and an op-ed that I wrote titled, "Iowa Women Deserve Better Representation," which was published throughout Iowa. AJ Conroy, an attorney for the ERA Coalition, contacted me, and we have become very close friends. She's offered some suggestions as to what we can do to get the ERA to become law, which I'll share with you. As shared on the video, 6 years after the ERA Coalition was founded, 3 additional states, Illinois, Nevada, and Virginia, they ratified the ERA, bringing the total to 38 states. But it must be noted, 5 states who originally voted to ratify, namely Nebraska, South Dakota, Idaho, Kentucky, and Tennessee, rescinded their earlier support. In 2020, the U.S. House of Representatives, they approved the ERA and they sent their bill to the Senate. You need to know that Senate Joint Resolution 6, by the way, a bipartisan pro-ERA measure, set on Republican Senator Mitch McConnell's desk until the Trump administration came to an end. The ERA legislation just collected dust. For your information, 78% of all Americans, 78% want the ERA to be part of the Constitution. This breaks down to 86% of Democrats, they support the ERA, and 70% of Republicans want the ERA to be in our Constitution. By the way, when was the last time 4 out of 5 Americans agreed on any one topic? And despite the wide margin of ERA support, it's going nowhere in Congress. I think it's sad that the will of the people takes a back seat to political parties. You might like to know that under the Trump administration, his Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel issued a deeply flawed opinion stating passing the ERA should be null and void issue. The DOJ statement has gone nowhere. At the beginning of the Biden administration, specifically on January the 21st, 2021, the U.S. House and the Senate introduced bills to remove the original and the extended 1982 time limit placed upon the ERA. House Joint Resolution 17, it was passed on March the 17th, 2021, with bipartisan support. One of my heroes is U.S. Representative Jackie Speier. Jackie Speier is a Democrat from California who said prior to the vote, and I do quote, "Women want to be equal, and we want it in the Constitution. I am equal on the House of Representatives floor with all of my male colleagues. But when I walk out of the chambers, I have fewer rights and protections than them. I rise today because the women of America are done being second-class citizens," end of quote. The U.S. House bill was forwarded to the Senate, where it is referred to as Senate Joint Resolution 1. It has been read twice in the Senate and has been sitting for about 20 months now in the Judiciary Committee waiting for action. Let's bring into my discussion actions of our two U.S. senators. About 13 months ago, specifically on November the 19th, 2021, a bill was introduced to require women to register for the military draft for the first time in American history. Senator Joni Ernst said, and I quote, "Because we have opened up every position to women in the military, I think it's imperative that women say we want to be treated equally," end of quote. Note how Joni Ernst said women should be, quote, "treated equally," end of quote. Yet when she and Senator Chuck Grassley were asked by the Iowa Commission on the status of women to participate in a roundtable discussion about the ERA, to this day, approximately 12 months later, there has been no response from either senator. Silence speaks volumes, doesn't it? On January the 10th of this year, a 77-page amicus brief was filed by the ERA Coalition and advocates from 52 organizations to force the United States Archivist David Ferrero to publish the ERA in our Constitution. As after all, 38 states have ratified the ERA, and there's no need for any further court action and or congressional action. The amicus brief states, and I quote, "The ERA has met the requirements for adoption and should be certified and published by the National Archivist. The vast diverse array of women's rights, civil rights, social justice, professional, and equality groups representing millions of people throughout the nation, the national signing onto the brief also speaks volumes for the ERA's long overdue need," end of quote. Now let's be honest. Women in America's society have come a long way since Abigail Adams told her husband, John Adams, in 1776 to empower women. First, same-sex marriage, it was legalized in the Obergefell versus Hodges court case in 2015. Secondly, in 2020, the Supreme Court ruled that discrimination against LGBTQ employees and students, it's illegal. Third, women were allowed into all military combat roles in 2016. Fourth, unisex and family restrooms and co-ed residence halls are now commonplace. And fifth, organizations such as the JCs, the Kiwanis, The golf clubs and the Boy Scouts, now called Scouts, admit girls and women. But nothing is equal between genders. I've been told that when it comes to wages, divorce law, property law, employment law, healthcare, access to capital for women-owned businesses, and harassment law. Let's focus on 10 facts that I think support making the ERA part of our Constitution. First, research reveals nationwide women earn about 83% of what men earn in the same job. Iowa women earn less than the national average. Iowa women earn 77% of what men earn, placing Iowa as the 37th ranked state for pay equality. That's rather sad, isn't it? We need to look at this wage gap in a different perspective. Since Iowa women earn only 77% of what men earn in similar jobs, this is equivalent to Iowa women losing more than $4.6 billion annually due to this wage gap. Imagine what Iowa families could do with $4.6 billion more in their checking and savings account. That's year after year after year. Again, that was $4.6 billion. With 76% of Iowa women ages 16 to 64 working, the ERA is a fiscally responsible and tax generation solution for all states to adopt. Secondly, the World Bank calls investing in women smart economics because research shows economic growth for women has a critical multiplier effect. Women are more likely to share their personal economic gains with their families and their communities. In fact, women reinvest 90% of their income in food, healthcare, home improvement, and schooling for themselves and their children. Putting these two facts together, women's progress is society's progress. Let me repeat that. Women's progress is society's progress. Ponder this third fact. Nearly 48,000 Iowa households headed by women, they're living in poverty. An additional 37,000 female-headed households, they do not earn enough to support their basic living expenses. Added together, 85,000, or 70% of all Iowa female-headed households, are struggling to make ends meet. Equal employment and equal pay would help, wouldn't it? So besides income disparities, why else do we need the ERA? Fourth, as long as this gender equality is not enshrined in our Constitution, there is the risk that should politicians and political parties who are anti-democracy, authoritarian, and or patriarchal in their thinking come into power, they could pass laws that would diminish the idea of equality in America. If you've listened carefully to what I've said so far, you know there are a bunch of politicians who purposely not advancing the idea of equality in America. We have it right here in Iowa. Example. In 1972, when Charles Grassley served in the Iowa House of Representatives, he voted yes on the ERA being added to our Constitution. Additionally, Chuck Grassley told the Des Moines Register, and I got this directly from the Des Moines Register, if he were not running for office, he would have voted against the ERA. Think about that. Chuck Grassley's post-vote statement speaks volumes, doesn't it? As a former Iowa legislator, I am greatly disturbed, and I truly mean this, when I see politics and re-election for office prevails over proper public policy. Fifth, we need the ERA because it's only equitable under the canopy of heaven for equal pay, fair healthcare coverage that addresses maternal mortality, and coverage for caregivers, protection against gender testing laws, prevention of discrimination against LGBTQ persons, protections for men in occupations and roles that are traditionally held by women, and protection against rollbacks in women's rights, period, ended. Reason number 6, we need the ERA because just as many women of color faced added barriers for voting until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, today, women of color are more likely to be underpaid and discriminated against more so than white women. This bears repeating. Today, women of color are more likely to be underpaid and discriminated against than white women. The ERA would end this blatant form of discrimination. The 7th reason is rather simple. We need the ERA because our nation must finally close the book once and for all on the idea that equality of rights is a debatable issue. Number 8 is another simple reason. Because a constitution is not only a set of legal protections, it is a proclamation of a nation's values. It is time we enshrined our values, equal rights, in our Constitution. Number 9, it relates to women-owned businesses. Research reveals that female-owned businesses generate as much revenue and grow at the same rate of male-owned businesses. Hence, women should have equal access to capital as men, which the ERA would ensure. And the 10th reason, as stated earlier, 78% of Americans, 4 out of every 5, want the ERA to be the 28th Amendment to our Constitution. What's holding back our politicians to take action? Through my documented and research-based discussion with you today, you know the answer to that question, don't you? Today, the last month of 2022, there are 3 major issues related to ratifying the ERA. First, 5 states who ratified the ERA have rescinded their earlier ratification, and 3 states added ratification after the deadline. So do we only have 33 states ratifying the ERA, or do we have the needed 38 states? The Supreme Court has ruled, since Congress set the rules on ratification, Congress and not them can decide if once a state ratifies an amendment, can they rescind their earlier support. The next issue is whether Congress will take action to forego the original and the extended 1982 ratification deadline. Answer, once again, the Supreme Court has said Congress set the 1979 and they set the 1982 dates. And if they want to make those dates 2020, 2022, or 2025, or whatever date, it's up to them and not the Supreme Court. The third major issue is a sticky point for the ERA. On March the 5th, 2021, Rudolph Cortines is a federal judge in Washington, D.C. He dealt a blow to advocates of the ERA in ruling that the deadline to ratify the ERA had expired long ago, and 3 states' recent ratifications of the amendment arrived too late to count. By the federal judge ruling what he did, Catherine Franke, the faculty director of the ERA project at Columbia Law School, said the status of the ERA now lies primarily in the hands of the people and their elected representatives. Hence, it's up to us and Congress to decide the fate of the ERA. So members of the League of Women Voters, have you expressed your feelings about the ERA to your duly elected congressional delegates? The infamous words attributed to Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. ring loud in my ear and also in my heart and in my soul. And I quote, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." End of quote. Does the ERA matter to you? Does it matter to your daughters, your granddaughters, your nieces, your female peers? If so, there is work that we can do. For future forums, the question needs to be asked of every school board candidate. Yes, even school board candidates. As the ERA principles affects the policies of the school district and the treatment of female students, along with people seeking an office at the city, the county, or the state, and also definitely the federal level. This simple question, do you support the Equal Rights Amendment, which 78% of Americans also support? Are you opposed, or are you opposed to females having the same rights as men? My friend, A.J. Conroy of the ERA Coalition shared with me 2 documents. I forward both of those documents to Senator Bill Dotzler. In the very first document, I asked Senator Dotzler and other senators to ask Iowa's Attorney General, Tom Miller, for his opinion on whether our legislators should consider the 28th Amendment ERA when they draft and debate new legislation. And it needs to be done, and pressure needs to be put on because of the change right now. We need to ensure that Tom Miller does this. The purpose of this letter to Tom Miller, asking for his opinion, was to seek his advice on whether sex is now also subject to higher scrutiny. You understand higher scrutiny right now, don't you? As a legal term, an advisory opinion from our Attorney General could be cited down the road by lawyers, judges, and journalists. You might like to know that Tom Miller has gone on record. Tom has joined other states in supporting of publishing, definitely publishing the 28th Amendment in our Constitution, as 38 states have ratified the ERA. The other ERA coalition document that was sent to Senator Dotzler asked Iowa's nonpartisan legislative service agency to create a report identifying all the places in the Iowa statute and administrative code where gender reference appears. Now, we've already received a report. This report will be a useful tool to see where Iowa laws might differ based on sex and could be cited down the road in court cases supporting the ERA. Now, I've also asked Senator Dotzler, and I need your help on this too. You need to reinforce this. I've asked him to watch every bill that is run to make sure that we're going to be okay. A.J. Conroy of the ERA Coalition and I asked you to contact your 4 U.S. House of Representative legislators and encourage them to co-sponsor House Resolution 891 that was introduced in the House of Representatives on January the 28th of 2022. Again, House Resolution 891. I'm going to go off script here, but it's most likely that none of them will oblige by your request. The resolution notes, like Tom Miller and other advisory attorneys have expressed, the ERA has been duly proposed by Congress. It's been ratified by 38 states and is therefore valid as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. But you still need to ask. And if they don't respond, then make it publicly known. Do an op-ed. Let the public know. I don't think the public's aware of all of this. And once again, I've shared this with you before, but just to ensure you know what the ERA and the 28th Amendment would do, it would prohibit the United States or any state like Iowa from denying or abridging equal rights under the law on account of sex. Now, here's another thing you need to be aware of, as it is closely related to the ERA, and it's House Resolution 7. Keep all of this in mind as we move forward. House Resolution 7 is the Paycheck Fairness Act. This bill addresses wage discrimination on the basis of sex, which is defined to include pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. The Paycheck Fairness Act had passed the U.S. House on March the 20th, 2021. Iowa's Democratic Party representative, Axney, voted yes. Iowa's Republican representatives, Henson, Miller Meeks, and Finstra, they voted no. I wonder if they get the same pay as the males in Congress. The Paycheck Fairness Act was sent to the U.S. Senate. Was sent to the Senate on June the 8th of 2021, where, believe it or not, it was defeated. Both of Iowa's Republican senators, Charles Grassley and Joni Ernst, voted no, which means I can only presume they feel wage discrimination on the basis of sex is proper and just. After Iowa's 19th Amendment centennial commemoration ended, there was quite a bit of money left over. And members of the advisory committee, which had a representative from 18 different organizations that collaborated on the 19th Amendment, the 100-year anniversary, agreed to give the balance of the funds to Carrie Chapman Cat Center for Women in Politics at Iowa State University for them to create an ERA curriculum for Iowa high school history, government, and social studies teachers and their students. Dr. Karen Krudowski, the executive director of the Carrie Chapman Cat Center at Iowa State, she was the principal investigator and creator of the ERA curriculum. Now, the 5 lessons on the ERA, complete with the PowerPoint slides and a teacher script, are now available for Iowa teachers to use in the classroom. And if you don't like to hear more about the ERA than what I shared with you tonight, or if you want to hear more, go to that website. By the way, the curriculum has been vetted for accuracy, and it meets Iowa's Department of Education standards. I really like the curriculum because not only is it research-based, but high school students can decide, and we can get them involved too, on their own accord, whether we should or should not have the ERA in our Constitution. So here's another task. Contact those teachers, have them pulling that curriculum out and sharing it. We have got to get this younger generation involved. We've got to. And I'm sure that they're not going to like what's going on. So let's get them involved. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you about the ERA. I really greatly appreciate it. And I've given you some great examples and things that you can do. So I look forward to your involvement. I look forward to you standing out and helping us make some changes. Thank you.